Hello and welcome to another episode of Archery Releases Ad Nauseum. This is part 2 of my analysis of B3 Archery's handheld release offerings. This part will cover their thumb releases, and it's going to be a bit more scathing than the analysis of the hinges. Thumb buttons have a lot more parts, and consequently there is more that can go wrong with them. The B3 thumb line consists of the Omega, Omega Pro, Omega Mini, Versa, Versa Pro, Exit, Exit Pro, Exit Mini, Exit 4, and Exit Mini 4. I think I'm going to do this video entirely in front of the camera since I'm finding it easier to do it this way, and I'm also waiting for some more stuff for my new recording space. Moving along. I was considering going over in this series how B3 came to be in some detail, but to sum it up, the individuals who started B3 used to be part of Scott Archery, and when Scott Archery was purchased by the Outdoor Group and their manufacturing was moved from Kentucky to New York, the guys who did not or chose not to stay with Scott instead stayed in Kentucky and started B3. As a result of the affiliation, some products that B3 makes bear an odd resemblance to the items that were, and some still are, manufactured by Scott. The most visually apparent examples of this are the Versa and the Omega. B3 Archery currently has two different sets of internals that go into their thumb releases. The Versa and the Omega use the same basic internal design, and that is derived from the Scott Exus and Scott Exus Core. Here they are to show the family resemblance. This is the Omega and this is the Exus Core. You might be able to see the resemblance. Another release that is still offered by Scott that doesn't need a DNA test to show its relation is the Scott Sigma. Scott Sigma, Scott Exus Core, and Omega. Along with the aesthetic similarities, all of these releases have very similar internals, and they all share some of the same features, like a multi-axis thumb barrel. Hook position is pretty much identical. The handles and their ergonomics have similar sensibilities. The cocking buttons are shaped very similarly, if not exactly the same. They also share the same quirks. One notable quirk of these releases is the heavier you set the trigger tension, the harder it becomes to press the cocking button. None of my other releases do this, or my thumbs specifically, or if they do, it's not to that degree. Also, due to the position of the hook on the models with the enclosed index finger ring, there's a bit of a learning curve in terms of positioning your fingers to hook up to a D-loop. Since the hook is even with the material on the top of the index finger ring, it can be kind of awkward to get your finger around to press the hook closed without, pushing the D-loop out of the way or getting it stuck between the hook and then this part of the top of the jaw. Compare that to other single action thumbs with enclosed finger rings like the Carter Just Because, and Insatiable, where the hook sits, Insatiable 2, the Insatiable doesn't have the index finger ring, but the 2 does, where the hook sits above the index ring, it's a little easier to hook up. When I do take these out and use them, I developed what I like to call, in my head at least, the Sigma Shuffle. Since I figured it out with the Sigma, what I do is I reposition my thumb against the outside top of the index ring. After I cock it, of course, then I take my index finger, bring it around, and then I close the hook. So moving along, the Versa and Omega are both single-action sear-activated thumb releases with a closed hook design, so they can be locked and hung off the D-loop if you plan to use them while hunting. If you haven't seen my video on release types, single action refers to the number of tasks the internal mechanism of the release is designed to perform. With a single action release, the only function of the internals is to cock the release. And being a closed hook design, the archer has to press the hook closed manually with your finger. There are also double action releases such as the Carter Wise Choice, True Ball Blade, and a couple others where the internals perform two different jobs. The first job is to cock the trigger, and the other is to auto-close the hook. Currently, B3 does not offer a double-action thumb release, so whether you go with the premium or budget models, you're going to have to be pressing the hook closed with your finger. So something to keep in mind when you look at features of various releases and their positives and negatives. Normally, with a single action thumb release, they tend to have crisper triggers with less creep and over travel. This is because tolerances between the internal parts tend to be tighter because they have fewer tasks to perform, and the manufacturer doesn't have to build as much slop into the mechanism so that they can function reliably. Unfortunately, B3 is kind of the exception to that rule, especially their early offerings of the Versa and the Omega. They have the least crisp triggers of any single action thumb release in their price bracket and that I own, and I own a bunch. They've gotten better with some of their newer versions of their releases. They've tightened up their tolerances, but if I had to rank my thumb buttons in terms of creep, break, and over travel, these would be very low on the list. Unfortunately, even the best and most expensive of the bunch, it's essentially a rolling trigger where you just creep straight through until it clicks, and no amount of adjusting I've tried has been able to tune it out. The newer models are better than the older ones, but I do believe the triggers are not up to par with their price tag. So while I'm actually warming to the concept of a trigger with a rolling break and some extra travel, as evidenced in my videos about the Abyss Extension Flex, it would be kind of nice to actually have the option of tuning it in or out depending on your preferences. So now that I've said that, let's get into some specifics. The B3 Versa is an open index finger design, so hookup to the D-loop is easier than the Omega because you don't have to get around this ring. The handle is completely straight and has no taper. As a matter of fact, none of the B3 releases are tapered, so if I forget to mention that later despite the fact that this entire analysis is scripted, well, there it is. Sizing is in the medium range, and with the star drive you can turn the ring finger extension in to make it feel smaller or out to make it feel larger. The finger beds are on the wider side with a large flat in the center and gently curving edges. Drawing with the B3 Versa is very comfortable since it distributes the force over a greater surface area of your fingers, and it almost feels like you're pulling less weight, which is nice, actually. The Versa comes in a number of different configurations. It comes in solid aluminum, solid brass, an aluminum body with a brass side cap, or, yeah, that's it. The solid aluminum versions are about $20 cheaper than the aluminum body with the brass capped version. Just a side note, when I mention a cap, the body of the B3 releases is not evenly divided. There is a thicker side which holds the internals and springs in place, and a thinner cap side. So you have a thick side and a thin side. There are a few companies that manufacture their releases this way. Those include Hotshot. Scott does it on their Apex, but not their Sigma, and I think there's at least one other that escapes me. The bodies of Stan Carter and Trueball thumbs are all made with their bodies divided right down the middle, so just halved. While the body and cap setup will probably make it easier to take apart the release without things flying all over the place. Side note, always take your release. If you take it apart at all, take it apart inside a plastic bag. That way if a spring flies out, you'll be able to catch it and not, it won't disappear into the ether like they always do. The other function of that is to allow the manufacturer to mix and match colors and materials for a custom look, weight, or feel, although I don't know why ones that are evenly divided wouldn't be able to do that as well. So the Versa was the first of the B3 thumb releases to accept the star drive system, allowing for different finger extensions from 2 to 4 fingers and adjustable sweep in multiple positions. Check out part 1 for a more detailed description of the star drive and the different finger extensions that are available to be used with it. Originally, the Versa's star drive was machined onto the body, and now it is just a steel stud that is press-fit into the handle. One thing of note is that the shape of the finger extensions designed for the older versions of the Versa do not fit the newer versions of the release. The newer finger extensions do fit onto the older Versas, so that's not likely to be a problem. With the Versa, there have been some incremental body changes from when they originally brought them out up until present. The shape of the middle finger bed, here's the older one, was made less defined on the newer models. Not really sure why. The little spur next to the hook has been made a little bit less pointy for whatever reason. And the hook above the index finger is a little bit thinner. Does any of this matter to the average archer? Not in the slightest, but as a holster maker, these little design changes can make life a lot more complicated. Older versions of the Versa are smooth on the sides with no additional machining. The finger beds are smooth on all the models. The newer version of the Versa, which is tagged with Pro now, has additional machining on the sides of the handle. I'm going to try to angle that so you can see it a little better. So the machining consists of overlapping circles and is supposed to aid in increasing grip on the release. While it definitely looks cooler and makes scratches less easy to spot, functionally it is completely useless. The machining is fairly smooth, so it has no bite or traction, and the finger beds are still smooth. So if they actually wanted to add grip, they need to add the machining to the finger beds the way that Trueball does, who is currently the only company to do that. As I said, it looks cool, but it has no function. Quality control wise, the two Versas that I own are very well finished. The two parts of the body marry up closely with no raised edges, the anodizing is consistent, and there are no sharp edges or burrs around the screw or pinholes. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same thing about the versions of the Omega that I have. The Omega has the same trigger internals as the Versa and the same size finger beds. The handle thickness is the same as the Versa, so you get wide finger beds and a very comfortable draw. The biggest differences between the Omega and the Versa is the enclosed index finger ring, and it also comes in a few different variations than the Versa. Currently, there are three variations of the Omega in terms of body style. There is the standard Omega that comes in a solid three-finger handle, where the ring finger bed is actually a little bit larger than the middle finger, which is strange, but it makes it feel more like a large release. There are a few versions of it floating around. This can be had in solid aluminum, solid brass, aluminum with a brass cap, brass with an aluminum cap, or aluminum with a stainless steel cap. The newer versions of the solid-handled Omega are more machined out around the spine, and they also have the useless decorative machining on the sides that I ragged about while talking about the Versa Pro. Next up, there is the Omega Pro, which has the star drive system, so it can be configured in 2, 3, or 4 finger configurations. I think it comes with a 3-finger and then this little 2-finger nub. At present, it only comes in anodized orange aluminum and was the first of the B3 thumbs to sport the extra machining pattern on both sides. And then lastly, we have the Omega Mini. The Omega Mini is a smaller version of the Omega and is closer to what most manufacturers would call a medium, and it only comes in a 3-finger version. B3 continuing the practice of manufacturers tagging releases as mini or small, when in actuality they are just smaller than the first version they released. At present, this version only comes in aluminum, and I think you can get it in black or blue, and the sides are smooth, so none of the extra machining on this one. My first encounter with quality control issues and B3 archery was with this Omega I bought when it first came out. It is the version that is aluminum with a stainless steel cap, and the two sides do not marry up evenly. I don't know if you can see it on here. You can see a little bit of shine right there. They do not marry up evenly in a number of spots. It's also raised here too. I don't know if you can see it. But there are visibly raised edges where the stainless side sits up higher than the aluminum, and vice versa, including on the finger beds. There are also sharp burrs around the pinholes that were not removed before leaving the factory. These issues seem to be exclusive to this particular version, and thankfully B3 discontinued their use of stainless steel on their thumb releases. Stainless is not an easy material to work with, and initially they had some issues following in their footsteps of their predecessors. Specifically, Scott Archery has a variety of, or has several stainless steel releases that are actually some of the best out there, like the Scott Ascent. And they tried to do it. B3 tried to do it too. They do have the Coupe and the Infinity Pro. The aluminum and brass versions of these releases do not seem to have this issue, or at least no more than any other manufacturer. If you look closely enough at some of the releases, even Stan with the Perfexer and some of the other ones, if you look closely enough at them, you'll find some that have some overlap issues or some QC where the pieces don't marry up perfectly. But this was pretty egregious on this one. A few other issues with QC that I had with these are both the Omega Pro and Omega Mini I purchased have chipping in the anodizing around the pinholes, which means the pins are either a little too large or the holes are slightly too small. Releases are tools, I understand, and will invariably get scratched, but they definitely should not come pre-scratched from the factory. One other nitpicky issue I have is the handle on the Omega I own. I can actually see light coming through the gap in the bottom of the handle between the two pieces, and I can also stick my fingernail in there and separate the pieces a little bit. No other thumb release that I own, I can do that, and I'm thinking there should actually be one more screw in the handle to press that end together, because potentially you can get dirt or something else in there that'll make its way into the mechanism. Does it affect its function? No, but at the price tag they're charging for their thumb releases, which are pricing-wise are on par with the most expensive offerings from Stan and Trueball, they should be absolutely pristine and absent of imperfections from the factory. The Omega Mini sells for somewhere in the $250 range, and the Omega Pro has an MSRP of $289.99. So for that price, you're in Stan Onyx and Trueball Blade Pro Flex territory. And of those three, I know who's winning the bronze medal. So B3's budget line consists of the B3 Exit, and it is designed to be as simple as possible. It is actually an original design from B3 Archery, and they secured a number of patents for it. I don't know what those are, so I'm not going to dwell on it. There are currently 5 different versions of the Exit, and they all use the same internal mechanism. Those are the Exit, Exit Mini, Exit 4, Exit Mini 4, and the Exit Pro. They all come in anodized aluminum and no other materials, and they come in several different colors. So going through the individual models, the original is the Exit. The Exit is a solid-handled 3-finger release. It is in the medium size range, and the handle is thinner than the Versa and Omega. The finger beds are the same size as a solid-handled Omega, and the hook position is the same as the Versa and Omega. So it's kind of, you could probably use this as a backup if you lose your higher end release. You'll end up with a similar anchor point, at least. Next up is the Exit Mini. The Exit Mini is a solid-handled 3-finger release, and it is the smaller version of the Exit. It has the same sized finger beds as the Omega Mini. The hook position is the same on the minis and the standard size versions, so they didn't change this part vertically, they just changed the size of the finger beds. Next up is the Exit 4. The Exit 4 is a solid-handled 4-finger and is the only B3 thumb release that actually has a hookup to be used with a wrist strap or lanyard. Something I forgot to mention with anything else. None of the other B3 releases have a lanyard attachment point, which is something that they all should have, and for some reason the manufacturers are not actually thinking of putting it on there, and I think that's a misstep. Next is the Mini 4, Exit Mini 4. It is a smaller, again, version of the Exit 4, but for some reason does not have the wrist strap attachment slot. I'm not sure why they decided to put it on that one, but not on this one. It would have made sense if you're, for continuity, if you're going to have a smaller person, you're going to want one, or they may want to be able to attach a strap to it. Actually, especially a kid. You know how they like to lose things. Okay, so one glaring thing about the Exit Mini, Exit Mini 4, and Exit 4, they have no tension or travel adjustment. So what you see is what you get. Also, the hook has to be it has to be opened when you go to lock it. It also has to be pressed closed with your finger, which also cocks the trigger. And there has to be tension against the hook in order to test its operation, because otherwise it just falls open. Lastly, we have, as I drop it into my lap, the Exit Pro. The Exit Pro does have tension and travel adjustment. The trigger stem is also noteworthy on this. This one has the slot for adjusting its depth, I guess you would say, and bolting on different thumb barrels, though you do lose the multi-axis adjustment on this like you do the other exits. The other ones come with a threaded stem that will accept a small and large thumb barrel that B3 offers. The threaded stems allow for limited height adjustment and customization, so your thumb may have to go to it instead of the reverse. Same actually goes for the Versa and Omega. They do have a multi-axis thumb barrel assembly, but it's the threaded on variety and it doesn't have multiple height holes. So it is what it is. So a couple of quirks or potential issues with the Exit. The shape of the neck and the way the hook needs to be pressed down makes D-loop hookup potentially awkward, especially if your loop is made with a softer material. I'm sure with practice it'll probably be okay, but there are far less cumbersome alternatives that are competing directly with these. Also, the trigger on the Exit is a typical simple sear mechanism where the linkage for the trigger has to slide out of the way of whatever is holding the hook down in order for the hook to let go. So the trigger does have creep before it releases. If you pull through your shots, it is manageable, but if you press with your thumb, it is noticeable if you're used to a double sear. That being said, if you're already using a double sear, you're probably not going to be looking at one of these unless you're buying it for someone else, or you're going to use it as a backup if you lose your primary release. So it's probably fairly inconsequential. In terms of competition, the Versa and Omega are priced in the $250 to $290 range, depending on where you buy them. B3 Archery is one of the companies smart enough to actually sell direct to the consumer from their website, but you do end up paying full price that way. The upside is you're getting it new, and you're going to get exactly what you want, and there is equity and convenience. That being said, the Versa and Omega are competing with the likes of some really heavy hitters like the Stan Onyx, Trueball Blade Pro Flex, Trueball Goat, and Scott Apex, all of which have crisper triggers, and all but the Goat have auto-closing jaws. In my opinion, I think they're overpriced for what they are, and they would be more suited in the $200 to $250 range where the Carters, Scott Sigmas, Hot Shots, True Fire Synapses, etc. are fighting for supremacy. But that's just one fellow's opinion. The Exit series MSRPs for $139.99 for the base models and $169.99 for the Pro and the 4. The main competition comes in the form of the Trueball Rave and Stalker, formerly the T-Rex Bone Collector, the Hotshot Vapor and Vapor 2, the Trueball Max Pro and Hunter, Scott Pursuit and Summit, Truefire Hardcore and Edge, and the Spot Hog Whippersnappers. Best name ever for a thumb release. Lots of competition with different features and capabilities, and the Exit is more expensive than all of them. It's a good entry-level release, but it doesn't have too much that would make it stand out from the others. It would make a good backup to an Omega or Versa, so that's something if you don't want to have to buy two, because they're really expensive as it is. What do I think of B3 as a whole? I think it's kind of they're kind of a I don't know what you'd call maybe just like a boutique kind of company. They're a smaller company, so if you want to support a smaller company, American made, they employ American workers. If that's something that you find or you have value in, then I would absolutely check them out. Like I said, I'm a bit of a trigger snob, and I have so many at my disposal to compare things, so maybe I'm being harsh. I don't personally think I am. I do use the B3 Versa Pro regularly when I shoot, but like I said, I think if you're going to spend your money for a release, I don't think I'd go with them. If you want the best of the best, they still have a little ways to go. Their stuff looks cool, and like I said, their hinges are good. Their thumbs are overpriced, in my opinion. But one way or another, I think that covers everything. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Check out my Etsy shop at AJBHolsters and my website at artandarchery.com, where I also have a sizing guide. I didn't talk a whole lot about sizing, but I have a sizing guide on there. It is a Google Drive folder with, I think it's 130 different PDFs with one-to-one scale pictures of every release I own, and I have a few that I need to update that soon. So anyway, take care, stay safe, and happy hunting. The Versa was the first of the B3 thumb releases to accept